Hi, it's Alexander Russo from The Grade. This is the Education Show, and I'm here with Freddie deBoer. Freddie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
300 podcasts. I love it. That's an amazing thing.
I mean, I must have done my first in like 2010. So, I mean, if you do the math.
Well, I'm the rookie then. I did some podcasting early on, audio style, and then came back to it with video about a year ago. I'm so glad you're here. For the folks who don't know you, can you sort of put yourself on the map in terms of ideological or intellectual fellow travelers, or help us understand where you fit in the media ecosystem?
Sure. So, I identify as a member of the far left, although other people sort of say I am a idiosyncratic member of that group.
Okay.
To me, I'm just sort of maintaining the old ways, but a lot of people, would tell you that I'm a reactionary. Um, in terms of education, I am someone who went to grad school, really ginned up to teach and research about composition, college writing, literacy education. I found, I mean, part, yeah, so sort of, I guess, influenced by my grandfather was actually the president of the National Council of Teachers of English, and
Oh,
he
okay.
had this wonderfully diverse publishing record where he published poetry in some journals, but also did like quantitative research in others, and that's sort of what I wanted to do. And I got to the academy, I got into academia and learned that they were not going to let me do that for various reasons. And so, disgruntled with my life in composition, I got more and more interested in education and education research. And I am probably best known for a book called The Cult of Smart, which came out in 2020. And my general sort of position in all of this is that educational outcomes are dominantly the product of, on the group level, socioeconomic and cultural factors that schools and teachers can't control, and on the individual level, individual talent differences between individual students that schools and teachers can't control. Which is sometimes
Okay.
represented as a kind of nihilism, but to me, it's not nihilism because there are many important things that teachers and schools do that are not quantitatively sort of, it's not the quantitative metrics. The problem
Yeah.
is
Right.
once you say that the only thing that matters is test scores, you have really dramatically limited what public
Right.
servants can do.
And we're going to get into that. But in mapping, the closest I could think of, and please correct me, I was thinking about John Shelton, who wrote about the education myth. He wrote a piece for me that I thought was really eye-opening about how we over-index what schools can and should do.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fellow traveler for you, or not at
Yeah,
all?
it's someone that I'm familiar with, and someone who, of what I have read, I have largely agreed.
Okay.
People often push me into the same category as Brian Kaplan, who is a libertarian, who is also a skeptic of what
Okay.
education can achieve. I think we come at it from very different angles. And there's also a guy named John Marsh, where he's not really, he doesn't really talk so much about sort of education's limits in sort of changing educational metrics, but he wrote a great book called Class Dismissed: Why We Cannot Teach or Learn Our Way Out of Inequality,
Oh, right.
which is an economic argument that says that the theory behind the idea that we can teach kids to sort of pull them out of poverty and inequality
Perfect.
just doesn't work.
Perfect.
Um,
That's super helpful.
yeah,
On the media side, we live in this chaotic, fascinating media world. Where would you put yourself? How would you help folks understand where you fit or how you see yourself in the world of media? Are you a Matt Iglesias? Are you Corey DeAngelis? Where do you put yourself?
so I mean, I started as a blogger in 2008. The summer of 2008 was when I wrote my first blog post, and with various breaks of various kinds. I mean, I've been blogging on and off since then. I have a newsletter now. Newsletter is just a blog, but that
Right.
Substack newsletter, my paid newsletter, is where most of my income comes from. I have also written for just about every place I can think of. I mean, all the major magazines and newspapers off the top of my head that I can think of, I've written for. I've kind of, I mean, I just did put this piece in the Boston Globe, but I do that much less often just because, I mean, frankly, the pay isn't very good, and it's just much more
Right.
work than writing for
Right.
my. And then now I'm writing books, and I mean, the goal is to sort of slowly transition into just doing books, but a lot of things have
Okay.
to fall the right way for that to happen.
Okay. The early bloggers that I know of, some of them at least, were brought into for better or worse, they were sort of brought into the journalism system and wrote as columnists or analysts. Did you ever contemplate going in-house, so to speak, or did that never appeal to you or never appear?
I've never gotten an offer. No one's ever asked. So probably because I'm known to be such a pain in the ass. So.
Okay, we're going to talk about that as well. Okay, so the reason we're talking on this particular day, on this particular week, is that you had a piece in the Globe, which, even though probably more people read your Substack than read the Globe opinion page, who knows, got my attention and certainly got a lot of people's attention. If I understand correctly, your argument is that we universalize the failure of American schools and we should focus instead on the narrow set of schools and communities that are really in trouble and work on them, not just academically, but across a spectrum of issues. Is that a fair paraphrase?
Yeah, and I want to start by saying that although I am known for this sort of out there, contrarian, sort of radical take on the limits of education, you don't have to believe any of the stuff that I believe about the limits of education to sort of understand this picture. And so if we sort of take it in a few different chunks, the first chunk, it is just indisputable that our best students are, if not the very best in the world, then they're certainly competitive with the very best in the world. I mean, in that piece, I list a bunch of the international competitions we win.
Yeah, we win everything.
We win everything. If you break down PISA results and you just look at the very top performers, we're all over the place there. This should not surprise anyone. Like that
Right.
the United States is producing the best students in the world should not surprise anyone.
Right.
And you have the median. Our median doesn't look great, but I mean, core to my point is that the median is dragged down. That because our poor performers are so bad. I mean, our worst performing schools and districts and students are so bad that they drag our median down in a way that can distort sort of where we are now. I never know what people sort of think of as good enough, but if there's just a ton of evidence that if you live in the average sort of American suburban town, right, and you are not in one of these places with really intense concentrated poverty and sort of broken down economic system, your public schools are probably just fine, right? That if you actually look, the outcomes are good enough, and also again, there's of course a great deal of heterogeneity in any school,
right?
And your kid, if you bring a kid to a school district and your kid has always been a top quartile performer, the odds are overwhelming that they're going to remain a top quartile performer in those schools.
Right. I don't actually, I know a lot of people reacted to your analysis of the situation and wanted to argue with your insights or argue with your data. I'm curious about who we're talking about that's popularizing the problem. And also, I'm really interested in your solution. So can we talk first about who are the worst offenders when it comes to this universalist failure? Who's on your list of folks who really are overstating the case?
So I would look at someone like Jonathan Alter, who I don't hear that much from anymore, but I guess he's older now. But he was once a what I would sort of call like a big voice in the sort of scowling school reformer sort of thing.
Okay.
And but Jonathan Chait at the Atlantic is a big voice in this regard.
Don't see him as much anymore either, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Matt Iglesias is a guy who, not to toot my own horn, but I think I have gradually pulled him a little bit over into my point of view. But he's certainly someone who is a loud voice with sort of the accountability rhetoric. Here's the thing, though. When I first started doing this was a sort of interliberal fight more than anything. It was, you had a sort of union, teachers union friendly sort of traditional liberalism. And then you had more of a neoliberalism that identified unions as the problem and that wanted to do these firings, these merit pay, etc. Nowadays, most of these, so-called school choice energy is not really in these John Chait medical atheists. It is now coming explicitly from the right, where you have a Republican sort of like private school vouchers for all. Let's eliminate public school and just replace it with a system of sort of subsidized but privatized education. I think that is, in that world, there's very, very little in the world of in the way of like care or statistics to back up what they're saying.
And in terms of the media, you take some swipes at the media, which is fine. I make a living taking swipes at the media. Some would say, are there particular newsrooms? Are there particular categories of journalists that are present day popularizing this inaccurate narrative?
If I wanted to say like where I think a lot of the problem is, it wouldn't really necessarily be a newsroom that I think is like dedicated to a declinist narrative. I would say that the biggest problem is the biggest publication, which is the New York Times, which in the last, over the last 25 years, but also particularly in the last 10, has really consolidated itself as the center of the media. It is in vastly better financial shape than any other newspaper in the United States. It is sort of the cultural nexus of this stuff. And the New York Times is not what I would call like a staunchly anti-union or pro-firing sort of place, but they exemplify a certain kind of incoherence right now. Where, I mean, I've trotted out a few times. It's pretty old now, but there was a piece that the Times put out years ago, which to me really just sort of crystallized the problem. And it was talking about school choice in New York, and I sort of pointed out that there's this incoherence about what choice is meant to accomplish. In particular, because the Times will talk about like better or worse schools, but sometimes they think that the best students should go to the best schools, and sometimes the worst students should go to the worst schools. They They are not necessarily like aligned with the traditional charter school sort of thing, but they talk an awful lot about all this sort of the students being left behind. One of the things that I think is striking that has happened since the pandemic is you had this Jonathan Alter sort of school, or Waiting for Superman, that whole sort of world, where I thought the message was wrong, but it was very clear what they wanted. And now I think that you have a very loud right wing that just wants to tear down the public schools, and then you have liberals who don't really know where to go or what to do. That I think that there is an exhaustion with the old sort of reform sort of debates, and a realization that nothing is going to fall out of the sky to suddenly raise all these kids up. But people don't really know what to say or what to do for reasons that I tried to articulate in The Cult of Smart.
Right. Well, let's talk about the Times a little bit more, since, as you point out, they become the center of the universe. 10 or so years ago, they hire Dana Goldstein from the American Prospect to be one of their main education people. They bring Erica Green on the Washington Bureau in, and they have a fair amount of firepower is the worst kind of word to use, but still. Are they purveying? I'm just looking for modern day purveyors of the crisis narrative, and if this is sort of a after effect that you're talking about, that's fine. But I'm looking for the people who are really fit your description now or now-ish. Dana's still reporting on education. Erica's covering the White House now, but
I mean, I would say again, like that energy is on the right now, and I mean, I could dig out names for you, but I don't spend a lot of time reading that stuff. But I will I will say look, in terms of like spreading the myth of universal American public school failure, I would say like Ben Shapiro, right? Like not to say that he talks about education that often, but when he talks about education, he's doing it for a larger audience than pretty much anybody, and he is speaking in purely declinist terms. But like Dana Goldstein is very bright, and I like her, and I like her work. I think she is a good example of this sort of liberal confusion about like what the issue is and where to go next, right? Like I think that she's very bright. She is not a traditional reform type. She's not anti-union. And I read a lot of her stuff, and there is, to me, I mean, of course I would say this because I have an axe to grind and I grind it, but I suspect she is someone who is aware of the massive amounts of evidence that we mostly at sort of very early in life float to our point of natural talent, and throughout schooling we remain there, right? And to the degree that people move very dramatically in that sort of hierarchy, it tends to be moving down because of some terrible traumatic experience, right?
Yeah. You're talking about social mobility.
Yeah, educational mobility. In other words, I mean, people, if they want to take a look at this, there's more words than you can ever want to read on my newsletter. But the simple reality is that if you look at from the top level, if aliens came to Earth and wanted to say what are the most true things about American education or about human education, they would say that we very early in our academic careers come to a particular point in the sort of academic hierarchy, right? Sort of percentiles or however you want to put it. And we tend to remain in those bands very consistently over the course of academic life. And as we get older, our place becomes even more fixed over time, to the extent that, for example, as many people have sort of, well, I guess not many people, but the people in my little milieu say is like, look, like we can gather data the summer after kindergarten that gives us pretty darn good predictive information about who's going to go to college and who isn't going to, right?
Okay.
And this is controversial because it offends people's sense of justice and it offends their sense of possibility. But increasingly, so I mentioned Matt Iglesias, he is a guy who now talks a lot about selection effects and talks about the idea that natural talent is a very strong predictor when that wasn't possible before. But I think like institutional liberalism, I mean, look, like I'm a big lefty, and in general, I think that institutional liberalism is kind of out of gas. And I think that's particularly true in the realm of education.
Okay. So in your understanding of the world and in the piece in the Globe, things like poor kids doing better in Mississippi or state by state or DC kids making gains doesn't matter, comes out in the wash, so to speak, because of larger socioeconomic issues?
I think that the record will show that every sort of purported educational miracle in history has eventually been revealed to be the product of some sort of fraud, right? So the Texas miracle, like why did No Child Left Behind get passed, and why did it have the shape that it did, was because there was supposedly a miracle in Texas in terms of raising the test scores. Right. And then thanks to the dogged efforts of local journalists in Texas, it was revealed that in fact local educational officials had developed all manner of dirty tricks to push kids off of the testing rules.
And has that happened? Yes, you don't need to know, and it may still be to come. But has that happened yet with the current successes? DC public schools, Mississippi, a handful of other places like that?
Well, so here's the problem, right? No, not yet. But here's the problem. It probably never will, because in the year in the late 90s, 2000, when this stuff was happening in Texas, Texas had a really robust local media because this was pre sort of internet, pre everything changing. Mississippi has never had local media as robust as Texas, and it certainly doesn't now. I mean, this is part of the tragedy of the decline of local media, is that like the watchdogs on public schools is one of the most important sort of roles. But look, like here's what I will say about Mississippi in particular, and there's an awful lot you can sort of say about this. I guess we will see, but it's important to say like there is a test, right, that they use to determine who passes on to the next grade. And this is proven to be controversial because people say, well, if you're just not letting kids through, then that means that, of course, the test numbers look better because you're creating the selection effect, the screen. it's important to say average scores on that test, the test that puts people into the next grade or not, are not getting better, mm-hmm. right? Which means that the overall population of kids is not getting better. Only the kids who pass the test, who go through the screen is.
Right. This is the selection effect that you talk about.
Right. And this is like, I would say that like, if you have no educational effect prior to a screen and you have the appearance of an educational effect after a screen, it's probably the screen.
Okay. So those of us who are universalizing school failure are misunderstanding the problem and obviously coming up with the wrong solutions for the problem. There's a concentrated problem, and it's not entirely school or academic related. Tell us what the remedies are then that you're proposing.
Sure. I think it's really important to say, I mean, we always have this debate about like, what's the value of the humanities, right? What's the value of the liberal arts? These issues are, to me, a very good example of why the humanities are so valuable, because part of the point of the humanities is to embed you in history and to understand where things have come from.
Right.
People are kind of blown away by this. The idea that the purpose of schooling or something schooling can do is to move people reliably into better economic circumstances is very modern. In other words, the idea that education's function is to take all these poor kids in Detroit and make them into happy middle-class Americans. Even 100, 150 years ago, people would have been like, what are you talking about? That's not the purpose, right? And
what's the record? Sorry to interrupt, but what's the record of I assume you're talking about cash transfers and opportunity zones and community investment. What's the is that the solution, or that's the approach you're recommending, and how did they do?
So here's the thing. Like, as I say in that piece, there's you can cobble together a decent case that improving sort of educational, like the sort of the social and communal economic situation for people will lead to some educational gains. It's important to say, if you gave all the sort of, if you took Detroit and you just gave it the same financial background as Palo Alto, would all the kids suddenly magically have the same test scores? No. However, part of the point is like one of the things that, like I say in the piece, Detroit public schools, 2/3 of the kids are chronically absent, right? That is not just poverty, but it is a sort of communal breakdown where local institutions don't work, and that has a sort of knock-on effect. You can call it like a broken window school of education or whatever.
Right.
The advantage is like, if we do these things, these redistributive programs, there's a pretty good chance that the educational numbers will get better. But more importantly, we'll have already redistributed the money, right? Like the point is, if the point is to like save people from inequality or poverty. Well, look, in the past 30, 40 years, we have become a dramatically more educated nation, right? I mean, there's the percentage of people finishing high school, the percentage of people finishing college, master's degrees there was a run of 10 years where master's degrees, the percentage of people going to master's degrees was going up 7% a year, right? Like we have become a massively more educated society.
Okay.
Inequality has only gone up in that period, and the working age poverty rate, which is I think the one that is most relevant for this thing, has not gone down at all, right?
Right.
So the big picture, 10,000 feet, like, is becoming more educated, making us have less poverty and lower inequality. The question is absolutely not, right?
Right. So
like, but this is all easy to say because as a big lefty, I want the tax and transfer programs anyway. So
right.
I have a. You might say that my motives are a little bit compromised, but
the 25% child poverty rate is something that you cite as a major factor in the piece, and let's all agree that child poverty is not something that is desirable at 25% or at the more traditional average of 10. Is the evidence as clear in favor of universal basic income or opportunity zone approaches, community development approaches? Is the evidence for them as strong as the school reform evidence is weak?
I mean, I would say that the first thing is like, number one basic thing with all of this is there's never any control group in education stuff, so it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to say about a lot of stuff. Number two is we don't really have a experiment of the size that we would need to say those things. I would say that, as I've gone to exhaustive and maybe exhausting lengths to show sort of school reform gains are illusory. Again, like I want to be clear. I mean, look, this is a sensitive conversation because this is, among other things, a race conversation, obviously, right? And what the sort of far right, sort of racialist right will say is, hey, look, white kids from X percent income percentile outperform black kids who are much richer families. How can you say that this will solve the problems? And again, the point is not that like these are magic bullets that will immediately solve the problems, but that there just really appears to be no alternative other than to comprehensively heal these communities, right? I mean, people ask me, okay, you believe in individual levels of academic talent, but you don't believe in sort of racial, racial differences in inherent academic talent. So what is it? I think part of the problem with the whole racial achievement gap question is everyone wants it to be one thing, but I think that it's very, very likely that it's just the aggregate of many small sort of individual effects, right? So you just go through yes, poverty, which is sort of a big sort of umbrella thing, but then you sort of break it down like what does poverty mean? Hunger, exposure to lead and other environmental contaminants, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is why, like I say, like the point of these programs is not just to like make algebra scores go up, but it is like we need to like reinvest in these communities so that you start to have like a kind of like a civic functioning going on within them that people in Greenwich, Connecticut can take for granted, right?
Yeah.
And so like I don't like, to be clear again, like I don't think that you can hand out dollar bills and suddenly kids are going to be good at algebra. But I do think that there's just kind of no alternative if you really care about this than to trying to sort of take a holistic approach in which we heal the communities in which the kids live and work.
One of the things that I know as well as anyone else, except perhaps you, that people don't like to be told that they're wrong about things and react in annoyed ways. One of the things that someone sent to me in response to your piece was, well, where is the progressive left on education? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, not as a gotcha kind of thing, but has the progressive left sort of taken up the connections between community and schools? And is there anything for schools to be doing differently, or is this predominantly a community redevelopment, societal redevelopment function?
So, I mean, like first, I'll repeat myself for like a third time, just not to be tedious. But again, I just think that many people have become exhausted by this issue because, I mean, if you look at like the Obama administration, right, there's a tremendous amount of energy and optimism going into, the continuity between Bush and Obama on a lot of these things. And Obama's giving his State of the Union speech where he's talking about how we're going to save everything. And then a lot of this evidence comes out and it's just not, the effects just weren't there. I mean,
hold on a second, Freddie. I'm getting a little bit confused because on one hand you're saying that the education level has gone up tremendously. On the other hand, you're saying that the reforms haven't worked. Help me understand the disconnect there.
Well, we can look at like the high school graduation rate, right? The high school graduation rate. Look, you look at like Hispanic students in particular. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I was born 45 years ago, I don't know if people understand this, 1/3 of Hispanic males dropped out of high school before they finished, right? Like the rate was through the roof, right? The overall rate, I mean, the rates are getting to be so high that like a lot of people have sort of dropped it as like an important indicator anymore. However, there is no underlying educational data that would indicate that is justified. In other words, if you are saying that we want kids to graduate from high school, but we want them to do so because they have improved academically, SAT scores haven't gotten better, right? NAEP scores haven't gotten better. There's all manner of things that if you sort of chart this rise, the rise is happening in high school graduation rate is happening independent of any educational effect. Why? Because the policy pressure came down on schools and districts to graduate more kids, and so that's what happened, right? I mean, people hear about Goodhart's law. The more that a number becomes a target, the less valuable it is, right? In other words,
the corruption of measurement, right?
Yeah, or Campbell's law is a related one, which says that the more that pressure that you put on a number, the more that sort of illegitimate effects on that number become inevitable, right? Mm-hmm. Tons of people are graduating high school who have no educational sort of argument for why they would, other than the states said to this, the feds said to the states, and the states said to the districts, you got to graduate more kids. Right. And so a lot of kids who didn't deserve it graduated, right? And so you can see this all over the place in the amount of money that colleges are spending on remediation. So you can, if you just Google around, you'll find there's plenty of stories in like the Chronicle of Higher Education, et cetera, where they're talking about the fact that colleges have really been struggling under the burden of remediation. Well, when you are graduating a ton of kids and now you're explicitly trying to push more and more of them into the college pipeline, right? Mm-hmm. Then you're necessarily getting more and more kids into that pipeline who lack sort of the elementary skills that they need. And so the colleges then have to do it. And of course, the kids take longer to graduate, so they take on more student loan debt. So I would say that we've become a more educated society. That doesn't mean that we have become a smarter society, right? Like, in other words, the underlying, I don't think that there's any question that like the degree to which we have graduated people from high school and college increasing is just not justified by being smarter than we were.
I'm guessing that the people you talk to or the people who read you take issue along a broad range of ideologies. The reformers obviously are going to say, hey, the reforms did so much good and we should go back to them. The traditional Dems might say, hey, wait, we put all this money into the school system. That's got to have counted for something. It's got to leave you with relatively few friends at the cocktail party, a feeling I can relate to, by the way. But if I understand you correctly, you're sort of saying a pox on almost all your houses. Is that right?
Look, I'm saying, I think overall, I mean, my general prescription is different individual human beings have a lot of different skills. That's true, like academically, but also just in general, right? There's many different ways to be a good human being, a valuable human being. The term "the cult of smart" was what I meant to say. Is like that is the fixation on intelligence as the sole summative value of a human being, which is bad and wrong. Right. What we are seeing, I would argue, in our educational system is inevitable once you are trying to push so many square pegs into round holes, right? My perspective is like, look, go back to 1975, right? 1970, 1975. The United States is at the height of its dominance, right? We're at the height of our scientific dominance. We're at the height of our cultural dominance. We're at the height of our military dominance, et cetera, right? We're putting astronauts on the moon. Number one, in that time period, in international educational comparisons, we were awful, right? I think this really surprises people, but we have always done poorly in international educational comparisons, going back to the very beginning of those kind of comparisons. So you look at like the average high school student in 1970, 1975, the only information that kid's parents might get throughout his high school career is a twice annual report card, right? Which report A, B, C, D, E, or A, B, C, D, F. Back then, they might not even roll those up into a GPA. Class rank was in most places not a thing back then, right? We just were not gathering data about these kids. Well, did that stop the United States from being the dominant power? No, at that time, we were making incredible advances in nuclear energy and in computing and in aerospace engineering, et cetera, et cetera. The whole approach of testing everything, quantifying everything, and then trying to use that to sort of force people into this pipeline just isn't sort of what we can sort of look at in the model when the United States had the biggest advantage over the rest of the world. But what we can say is in 1970, if that high school kid, if he ended up not being a very good student, there was a factory at the edge of town where he could go. Maybe his dad works there. He can get a union job. and it won't be glamorous, and it doesn't have a ton of headroom, but he can have a middle-class lifestyle where he can buy a house, have a couple cars, send a couple kids to college, etc. That doesn't exist anymore. And so the pressure on the system, the pressure on the educational system is, well, when you destroy the industrial base of the country, you ship all the manufacturing overseas, you are creating a condition in which the educational system now needs to be the savior for everyone, which it never was designed to be.
One last question, Freddie, and thanks again for coming on and sharing these thoughts. It's certainly a lot to think about. What is your sense of the state of the I'm going to call it truly liberal media, the liberal identifying media, the American Prospect, the Nation, Jacobin, if I'm saying that correctly? I know that the argument came along about a year or so ago and identified itself as liberal. Is there a robust ecosystem for you to spread your ideas or have your ideas debated?
Number one, I don't think anything in media right now is robust. Right?
Okay.
Like you look at sports media, some things are robust because the gambling companies are making money hand over fist and they're pouring money into media.
Yeah.
It is just a very dark time for the industry. It's great that I can sort of do this by being crowdfunded, right? But like, you'll note that I can't send reporters to Mississippi to figure out what's going on down there, right? And this is a general problem. I think that like crowdfunded newsletters, etc., are fine, but they have real limitations that actual institutional media used to be able to do. As far as spreading my ideas go, no, I'm very used to sort of shouting into the dark, and I have very, very little purchase. I don't have kind of converts out there. I will say,
except for Matt. Matt's your convert.
Well, no, he's definitely not a convert. I'm just slowly, I'm just trying to,
Well, let's see if we can help with that a little bit. Where do people find you and follow your work?
Yeah, so my newsletter is at freddiedeBoer.substack.com, and I have a new book coming out this fall called All in Your Head, which is about mental health and disability, and you should check that out.
Excellent. Freddie deBoer, thank you so much for talking with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.